Hello again, everybody. I'm Chris Lee, your host at the 14 Podcast. Blake Lovell alongside me on a Friday morning as we do this. Blake, I look outside the window. The sun is shining. We got baseball tonight. We got tournament play of basketball in the SEC starting soon. I feel like the darkness is finally lifting in the universe.
Let's hope so, because, this is it's a fun time of year, as we've continually stated on the podcast. Lots happening, and, now as we head into SEC basketball regular season finales on Saturday, and then the tournament tips off next Wednesday. And like we said before long, 2 weeks from today, we'll have conference play in SEC baseball. So things are really starting to ramp up a bit here in the league.
Well, one of the cool things about basketball season late in the year is sometimes things pop up that end up being interesting or significant that you're not expecting. And yesterday, as we ended the podcast, I just kind of threw it out there to say, hey, look, Vanderbilt and Cincinnati have a game tonight. It doesn't really mean anything. Just letting you know, right? And so I couldn't watch the game last night. My son had a baseball tryout, and so I'm there. But I've got the game tracker on my phone, and I'm looking at it. And every time I look down, Scotty Pippen scoring points.
Yeah.
And he ends up with 36. He missed 4 shots, 1 from the line, 3 from the field, has 4 steals, and just frankly wins Vanderbilt a game by itself at Cincinnati. By the way, Vanderbilt, I think, at 91 in Ken Pom today.
Yeah.
So the record not showing, but that program's getting better. I don't think that was something we expected, but my goodness, Scotty Pippen hadn't played in 3 games. We didn't know if he'd be even available on Thursday night. And he put up, I don't know, has anybody put up a better single-game stat line this year than that one?
It's pretty impressive, for sure. And just quickly, you did bring up that Vanderbilt was 91 in Ken Pom. They finished 91 in Bryce Drew's second season. His first season, they finished 33. But since then, that was 2017-18. We know what the past couple of seasons have looked like. So that's a pretty significant jump for that team and that program that finished 169 last year, 155 before. But I'm with you. I mean, that performance, which I know a lot of people probably didn't actually get to see it. It was on ESPN Plus, but it's one of those that's just completely glaring. And then when I think, when you look around him, I know they got 15 points from Jordan Wright. I think DJ Harvey had 10, but it's like this guy just completely sort of put the team on his back in terms of Scottie Pippen. And the stat line, like you said, he goes 5 of 7 from 2, 5 of 6 from 3, 11 of 12 from the free throw line, had 4 steals, 3 assists, 3 rebounds. That's why we had him where we had him in our rankings, right? Because we kept saying, I know this team was at the time, at the bottom of the SEC, and you're thinking, man, how can you really put a guy that high based on his team just not winning games? But I think we see it, it's just different, man, when he's out there. They're a different team, and I know they lost a lot of those close games, but I don't know, it's just, I think the uniqueness of the way that week played out, where they had a chance to potentially beat Tennessee. I know the game ended up being 12 points, but it was way closer than that. And then they beat Ole Miss without him. I just think that's one of those sort of weird things that happens during a course of a 30-game basketball season. And I don't think at all does it mean that Vanderbilt was ever a better team without Scottie Pippen, because as we saw in that game against Cincinnati, he's a game changer. And when you let him have those kind of games, or he gives himself a chance to have those kind of games, look out, because he is one of the best in the league.
Yeah, I'm looking at Ken Pom's offensive rating for him for that game last night. He pulled a 158.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think if anybody in the league has done better than that this year. My first thought was Cam Thomas, and I think he had a 153 as I looked up. Darius Days has got the highest offensive rating in the league, according to basketballreference.com, which the way they calculate it, I think, is a little different than the way Pomeroy does. There's some slight differences in there.
Sharif Cooper's got a 159. He had that.
Okay.
He's the first one I thought of, and you know what? He had it against Vanderbilt. So
of course,
yes. So for whatever
Pippen was guarding him,
I was going to say,
for
whatever reason, Sharif Cooper was the first guy I went to when I went to start searching for some of these, and what do you know? He had a 159 against Vanderbilt. So there you go.
Okay, Darius Days pulled a 176 against Texas A&M.
Wow.
Actually had a 200 in the opener against SIU Edwardsville. Now, I don't understand this exactly because, like, the game where he had okay, he's got a 174 here and he only scored 11 points in 31 minutes. 4-4 from the line, 9 rebounds. I don't really know.
This is what we need. You know what? We
I know,
say
like,
this
I
all
don't
the
know how to
time.
decipher this.
We need to get Ken Pomeroy on this podcast. Like, that is our next thing, because I want to know too, like, some of this. That would be, I think, a fascinating offseason discussion, is to talk to him about some of those things. And then this time next year, we're completely locked in when we try to figure out, what some of these numbers and what they actually mean and what goes behind it, and all that. We're going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now. I don't have no idea when it's going to be. We're going to get him on this podcast and we're going to explain some of these metrics. So,
I have met him before. It's been a long time. Nice guy. And
oh yeah,
obviously knows what he's doing. But I think the one criticism I have of Ken Pom is sometimes I don't know exactly what goes into the mix in terms of what his stuff's. Now, I think it's really good. I think like the adjusted defensive efficiencies and offensive efficiencies and stuff. I mean, we swear by this now. Like
yeah.
it's in the common vernacular of college basketball. So like if Ken's doing something, I trust it has value. I just don't always understand what he's getting at.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that up too, because one of the people on Twitter, and I'm trying to remember, I think Brad Grant, maybe I think pretty sure he's a Florida fan, and he brought up the fact on Twitter that we didn't have in the poll we did on Twitter, which by the way is up to like 520 something votes now. Herbert Jones still leading the way on our SEC Player of the Year vote. And he asked, well, why is Trey Mann not listed, as the third guy instead of maybe, I don't know, someone else like Cam Thomas or whoever else we had in the poll? And he pointed out, Trey Mann's 3 in KenPom in terms of the all SEC team. And that was the thing I thought about when he said that, was like, it's interesting because we don't know exactly what goes into factoring in, the SEC all KenPom team. And so that's another question that I would put in there in terms of whenever we chat with him, because I think that's interesting too. I mean, as of now, like Cam Thomas is 1, Scotty Pippen's now moved up to 2, Trey Mann's 3, Moses Moody's 4, Herbert Jones is 5. Now, obviously, we've got 4 of those 5 in our top 5 rankings, but Drew Smith, I think, was the other one we had at 4. Trey Mann we had at 6, so not that much of a difference. But I would be interested to know kind of what metrics and everything that kind of goes into that too. So,
Yeah, with Drew Smith, I don't really understand why computer systems don't like him better. Like I can't figure out why he's not on the Ken Pom team. I can't figure out why he's not showing up in the top 10 for win shares, because you look and he's a guy who does a lot of stuff, right? I mean, I do think
yeah.
that they place a premium on volume scoring. That is one of my guesses. I think that, I don't know, if I were coming up with a system, I might do it a little bit differently, because my thing, if you've listened to the podcast, I think that sometimes volume scorers who don't shoot a really good percentage, I think that contribution gets overrated, because when you miss a shot, unless your team gets a rebound, you're giving up a possession, right? So that's an opportunity to score that you missed because you took a shot that you didn't hit. So that's my one bugaboo with some of these ratings and things, is that I look at them sometimes and I look at the things that guys do who block some shots and get some rebounds and have good assist to turnover ratios and shoot the ball at a high percentage. And I don't get, when I look at these things, why these guys aren't higher rated. And I mean, Drew Smith, that's the thing that puzzles me. If you just look at raw numbers and rates and percentages, that's a kid that, to me, it is a player of the year type resume, especially given what he means to his team. But these guys that do these things, that know more about it than I do, when they run their formulas, they don't have him on there. And that's one of the puzzling things to me. Is I look at Drew Smith and he's a guy who should show up, I would think, on these things more, because the numbers are good across the board, and yet he does not.
Well, as we know, the computers don't love Missouri this year, for whatever reason. They got a great resume at times. You look at it and you're like, man, look at all these wins. But that's what we've said. The difference between the metrics and the resume, maybe it is factored into Drew Smith as well.
I want to ask you something. This is completely off where we've been. Who's the best shooter in the league this year?
That's a good question. Didn't we talked about that I think a couple weeks ago in terms of like the stats and the SEC stats. Who was it? There was only like I want to say there was only like a couple different guys that maybe actually qualified in terms of the top part of the league. I'm going to pull it up right now because I'm very curious to see if that's changed. Um, was it Javante Smart? I think was leading the
Yes,
way
that's who
last
it
time.
is.
Yeah.
I'm looking at 3-point percentage on Sports Reference's SEC page. And it only lists two guys. I guess there's only two guys, whatever their qualifications are, and
Well,
that may vary. I don't know what the SEC has as its officials, but it's Smart who's shooting 45%, and AJ Lawson who's shooting 37.
I would probably still go with. I would probably still go with. I don't know. Like I think John Petty's the best shooter overall, but he can be streaky too. Like in terms of three-point shot. Like his percentages, I don't even know exactly what his percentage may be, but like if I don't know. I guess in whatever context, like if I'm doing a 3-point shootout, um, I don't know. I'd have a hard time probably picking against John Petty. I think, but like we said, maybe we were also underestimating AJ Lawson because he's hit quite a bit and he's played less games. So that's something else too. To maybe we're kind of undervaluing the type of shooter that AJ Lawson is. So
Yeah, I don't think these guys are bad shooters, but if you take a list of top 2 or 3 shooters in the league this year, whoever those guys, and Petty's shooting 38%. And remember, the three is further out than it's been in past years, and that is going to affect percentages. But I think if you say, here's the top 3 or 4 shooters in the league this year compared to past years, I don't remember maybe a year where that list was as unimpressive as it is this year.
well, and that's something I think we probably talked about this before in terms of the SEC and the overall 3-point percentages, which is one of the things that I have continued to bring up when it comes to the debate about the SEC's fouling and free throw problem and those kind of things, is the fact that just historically, if you just look at the SEC's percentage in conference games, like the 3-point percentage overall in league games has been, in that bottom tier nationally for, I mean, several years now. Like, and I think, you can even go further than back than that. Like, there have been a couple years where the SEC's maybe jumped up into like the teens range, but for the most part, like the SEC's usually finishing in the 20s in terms of, stacking it up with the other, whatever many conferences Ken Palm used with 32. The SEC's usually in the 20s. Like this season, if you look at the aggregate stats in conference games only, the SEC 3-point percentage is 33.5%. That's 22nd nationally. Last year, they finished 28th nationally in that. The year before, 23rd, and so on. 28th the year before that. So, like, I think that's something that you certainly look at too. It's like, and that's what we've talked about, sort of the differentiator with, we talked about like a program like Vanderbilt over the years. What was the one thing we always looked at with Vanderbilt? Maybe they weren't recruiting to the very tip top level, but they always seemed to have shooters that could sort of, make things completely different. Like you had a John Jenkins, you had all these other guys that would come through and be able to knock down threes. And so that's something that where, if you can just have guys that can do that, if you're comparing it to the rest of the league, like you just said, like some years there just are not really many standout 3-point shooters. And so if you can find that element, like that can be something that can kind of separate you from the pack.
Okay, guess who's second in the league in 3-point shooting from a team level?
I have no idea.
I don't know if that'll surprise you more than who's number one.
Vanderbilt?
It's Florida 1 and Vandy 2.
Yeah, there you go. So neither
of those teams we look at and say they've got a shooter, right? And Vanderbilt's a team that always has a shooter.
Well, that was the stat, and now I just think about it. I put that stat on Twitter a couple weeks ago. Vandy has hit 8 or more 3-pointers, I think, in like it's a pretty significant amount. Like I'm looking up down 1, 2, 3, 4. They've hit 8 or more 3-pointers in all but 4 games this season. So, like, that's something that kind of, they hit 8 last night against Cincinnati. They had a streak there of 3 in a row where they hit 10, 13, 11. And then you just go up and down the line. Yeah, they've hit at least 8 in all but, I think, 4 of their games this season. So that is something that's kind of wild when you think about, like you said, percentage-wise. You don't really think of them as just top 3-point shooters. So,
well, and yet if you made a list of the best 23-point shooters at Vanderbilt since the line got instituted.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd put a player on this team in there.
I was gonna say I could probably rattle off 10 right now. Just I don't know if no one wants to hear that, but like you thought, John Jenkins, Frank Secker, Drew Maddox, Dan Lange, Matt Freege,
Billy McCaffrey, Shane
McCaffrey.
Foster.
How did I forget Foster so far down that list?
He's only their leading scorer of all time. But
yeah, there you go.
I mean, Scott Stroud, Derek Wilcox, Barry Booker, Charles Mays. I mean, you could just go on, and I think we could get 20 in 2 minutes. But Scotty Pippen is their leading 3-point shooter, 39.2%, but he's only hit 40, which is not a ton. I mean, that's not bad. That's about 2 a game for him because he has missed some time and Vanderbilt's missed some games. But I mean, it's not a team that you look at and say, oh my goodness, they're going to just shoot the lights out from 3. But what they've got, they've got a bunch of guys who've hit between like 15 and 40.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's what we keep talking about, like with Vanderbilt. Like it's one of those things where, we know what Alabama's going to do. I think, in terms of how Nate Oates recruits, like he's going to always have a chance, I think, to have a really good 3-point shooting team. I would say the same probably with like Auburn, because this season's a little bit different as we talked about with them. But I mean, we've seen like some of Bruce Pearl's best teams, like they've had guys who can just get up and down the floor, knock down the 3. And so I think, those are 2 guys specifically that we know are going to recruit to that. Like they're going to be able to find shooters, I think, in terms of just adding it into their rotation. Really, I mean, if you look at the other SEC teams, like is there any other program right now that you feel like just completely hits that point? Like, I don't know if Arkansas, like, I mean, and again, look, it doesn't, right? They're winning games. Like it doesn't matter. But like, I feel like Alabama, Auburn are probably the 2 teams that you're going to look at and say, well, if I just think about teams that are really going to be able to, maybe make that part of their system and part of their style, that Alabama and Auburn are going to be teams that probably shoot the 3 quite a bit. Elsewhere, I feel like it's kind of up and down in terms of maybe what the other focus is for some of these other programs.
Well, like Mississippi State has had some outstanding shooters from time to time from distance. Tennessee has had. I mean, Chris Lofton may be the best 3-point shooter in the league in our lifetime. I mean, if he's not, he's in the top 5.
And Bruce Pearl was the coach, right? So
and
there
if
you
you include, and I don't just include percentage. I'm like, who's the guy that hits a lot and hits at a high percentage?
Yeah, it
can hit them with the guy in his face, with the shot clock running down. I mean, Chris Lofton just did all those things for Tennessee. But this will be a good chance to transition to something else I wanted to ask you about, just off the top of my head. Analytics control so much these days, right? And like Nate Oates, you're on the bench if you're not shooting basically a jumper in the paint or a 3. And I get it. I don't know that I entirely like it. It's kind of like launch angle with baseball. Like we've seen this game now where it's home runs or strikeouts or walks, and now you're not seeing as much infield defense the game has changed, right? And as a guy who believes in stats and believes in taking that to use to your advantage, I totally understand and get and respect it, but it's changed the way everything is played. I mean, it's changing it in the SEC in basketball. And we grew up on the days where you had shooters. You had a Chris Jackson at LSU, and you had guys in the paint like a Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, the back to the basket game has just completely disappeared. And I get it, but I wonder, okay, to me, in one way, the product has gotten better, right? Because the game is more free flowing than it was 6, 7, 8 years ago. It got to a point to me where the game was just almost unwatchable. And I feel like that has gone out. I feel like they've done a better job of calling fouls, of clamping down on hand checks, of all the things that really made it a poor product for a while, in my opinion. But that element that we grew up with of a Will Perdue or a Shaquille O'Neal, a Dwayne Shintis, guys like that I think made the game fun to watch as I grew up, is now completely gone, and it's just a totally different game. I don't know if it's better or if it's worse. To me, I guess you get biased on what you grew up with sometime, and I really loved SEC basketball in the 80s and the early 90s. because it had so many guys that could do different things, and teams had guys that were shooters and posts and those things. Now it's just this homogenous game where you've got a 6'7" guy playing the five, and 6'8" point guards at times, and it's maybe different is not worse, but I find myself missing some of those things.
Well, let me ask you this, because this just popped into my mind as you were asking this question, and so I had to look it up. If you which we all, like, everyone, Michael Jordan era, like in the NBA, like we all remember it, like it just completely stands out. Let's see, what was the Jordan won his first title in? Gosh, this is gonna bug me. I guess I need to look up what year he won the first title there, and then what was the last year he won the title was '98. In the NBA in 1997-98. The average 3-point attempts per game. Do you want to take a wild guess at what that was?
15.
12.7.
Now, is that for one team or both?
It's a league average. So 12.7 was the league average per game in terms of 3-point attempts. Do you want to take a guess at what it is this year?
30.
34.9. So I think that's a product of what you just asked in terms of the college game and kind of where it's gotten to. Because, like, the three-pointer has just become such a huge... Like, even 2011, 2012 in the NBA, the average three-point shots per game, 18.4. So it's almost doubled in a span of, 8, 9 years? So I think that's playing into it a huge deal because... this is, like it or not, like everyone or, most guys that come into college, like they want to get to the NBA. And I think this is just kind of that style to where, positionless basketball, right? That's the buzzword and has been for the past however many years now, is you want guys that can do a little bit of everything. You would love to have guys who can play lots of different positions. And I think that's just kind of added into the fact that the three-point game has become way more prevalent now. There's lots more shots being taken. I'd love to look this up from a college level too, but the first thing I thought of was NBA, was just thinking, I'm sure there's been such a drastic change in terms of the value of the three-point shot because, again, if you just go back into that era 20-something years ago, like you're barely getting to double digits in terms of how many threes are taken per game. And now, it's 35. And so I think that's just kind of where the game has gone towards. But I'm with you. I mean, there are certain things to where I think you can still get away and win with like the old school styles. And I think, for example, Virginia, like you'd have to break down the numbers and do all that, but Virginia's the team that always comes into people's minds when they say, okay, what's a different style of basketball that you feel like you're watching? Well, Virginia's one of those, even though they shoot a pretty high percentage from three and they get a lot of their points from three, but it's just like it's a different style. And so they have some of those kind of throwback elements, I think, in terms of how they play. So I don't know, like it's a really good discussion. And like you said, it does go in probably deeper into the analytics and kind of just the individual change in the game where it's the highlight era where, you want to be able to get 3 points instead of 2 points, or you want to be able to take a dunk instead of taking a 12-foot jumper that, is going to get you the same amount. So I don't know. It's certainly different. It's certainly changed. And it's just, I guess, the evolution of the game.
Well, and I don't say this to judge, right? Because I totally get it. I might be doing the same thing if I were a coach, but I feel like everything now trickles down from two things. It's either analytics or it's appealing to the pro ranks, right? Because you look at Kentucky, and John Calipari's thing is, hey, come play for me for a year and then go pro. Well, the way you get to the pros and make yourself attractive is not playing in a Princeton-style offense, right? It's his dribble drive and the things that he does. And I think that at least at the power conference level, that dictates so much.
Yeah, no, it does. And I, like you said, that's the choice for some of these players is, it's about style. And you know what? Like, that's one of the reasons why Alabama is recruiting as well as they're recruiting. Like, that is a style that if you're just an average person sitting out there, like, and you just enjoy basketball, you're probably going to find yourself very entertained by how a team like Alabama, or we can use Auburn in recent years because they've kind of been similar in terms of how they've approached it. And that's not to say some of these other teams haven't. I think Arkansas is probably going to, get back to that point. They already are in terms of some of how they play. It's a very entertaining style, and that type of stuff. So I think you're exactly right. Like, it is like guys just want to be able to, they're going to gravitate towards some of these different styles. And with Kentucky, Cal sent so many guys in the NBA at this point. It's just easy. Like, you don't even have to. It's just easy to do. Like, you can say, "Here you go. Here's our system. Here's how it works, and here's how it's going to prepare you for the NBA." It's just, I don't know. There's lots of different options, but at the end of the day, most of these high-profile recruits, which a lot of them are getting recruited by SEC schools, they want to get to the NBA and probably want to get there as fast as they can. And so you're looking at different styles of play and saying, "All right, that one's going to get me there," whereas, maybe there's another one that is more based on some of the more old school type of principles, and you don't feel like that's going to get you as far as quickly. But that's, I think that's just the nature of human nature now, and I think it's just the nature of how the game is played. So,
and if you're listening to us for the first time, or one of the first times, it's not that we're down on the league at all. In fact, I think you and I have been big proponents of, hey, this league's getting better. It's gotten better coaches. It's on the way up. We were encouraged by the direction of things. It's really just more of a commentary as I'm just noticing things, and as we're putting together rankings and stuff. It's just been this absence of these shooters the way that we used to see them in the league, left and right. And again, it's not necessarily good or bad. It just is. But speaking of which, Ken Pom put out a tweet last night that Vanderbilt's win over Cincinnati basically has really solidified the league's place as the third best conference for now in his rankings. And so again, to substantiate the claim that the league is getting better, Ken Pomeroy would say that it is.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that stands out too is, we had high expectations going into the season for some of these different teams that have disappointed, like Tennessee, Kentucky, ones like that. But if you look at it just from the numbers, like the SECs, I mean, like they're sitting there third behind the Big Ten and the Big 12, and really they're not that far behind the Big 12. Now there's still I guess a plus a 1% gap behind them, but it's still a pretty significant spot for the SEC based on the fact that last season they finished sixth. The year before they finished fourth. And then they kind of just hovered around that 4 and 5 range, I think, for the several years before that. So, it's interesting to think about because, we talk about this and we talk about how maybe some of these teams haven't met our expectations. But if you look at it as a whole, I think Vanderbilt has played a part in that because, like we just said, like they're up to 91 now, and A&M's 130 in Ken Pom, South Carolina's 103. So Vanderbilt is actually only 2 spots behind Georgia when you look at it that way. So I think that's it. Is maybe just the bottom of the conference has gotten a little bit better, but the overall at the top, you've still got a lot of teams hovering, in that 20 range outside of Alabama and Arkansas. And so that kind of helps too, I guess, in terms of just the overall landscape of the SEC.
How weird is it to look at this and see the ACC below the SEC and then the Big East to follow? And I know the Big East has changed and that's different, but I guess it's another bizarro world 2021 moment here.
Well, and this is why I think when we talk about the bracketology and the SEC teams and all this, there are some people I don't know that can understand why some of these SEC teams are still rated so highly in terms of looking at the brackets and saying, well, some of these teams are projected as 4 seeds or 5 seeds or 6 seeds or 7 seeds or whatever. I think it's just like we've seen. It's just the numbers kind of support that the SEC is still a pretty strong conference, even though people like us who watch the league night in, night out, we can get frustrated with some of the teams because we just think, man, I feel like they should be better. They should have won that game. And we thought they'd be a little bit stronger. Well, at the end of the day, like they're still strong teams, or otherwise they wouldn't be kind of rated where they are in terms of you just look around at the brackets and look at their overall resume. So, that's the thing is we can be frustrated with Tennessee, but you know what? The fact is Tennessee's probably still going to be a 6 or a 5 seed in the tournament and going to have themselves in a much better position than if they were an 8 or a 9 or something like that. So I think that's it. You just got to keep that in perspective too.
Well, some of it's dictated by the world we live in, right? We want to have quick takes and we want to have this team is this and that team is that, and this coach is this or this player is this. Life doesn't work that way. I mean, it changes on a night to night basis, and we kind of bemoan it at times. We get frustrated because we want to be able to size things up. But frankly, if you think about it, it's more interesting when we can't.
Yeah, it is. Like it's we can overreact to one result, but as we've said, it's just sort of the full body of work is kind of what matters, and you have to place it uh, into that. And so, by the way, did you realize that I guess as of last night, I think Alabama's moved up in bracket matrix at least, which, as we said, compiles a lot of different brackets, but Alabama's moved up to the number 1-2 seed now. So
Oh,
things
wow.
things getting a little more interesting there. I think because Iowa, I guess, has moved down below them. So has Ohio State. They're both have the same average seeding in bracket matrix. They're at 2.07, whereas Alabama's moved up to 1.99. Now again, that's a compilation of a lot of brackets, and there's even I want to say there's maybe a couple brackets that have Alabama as the number 1 seed. So that probably helps in terms of looking at the percentages that averaging all those brackets together. But I thought that was kind of noteworthy is they're inching up. Now they're still significantly behind Illinois in terms of just the average overall number of Illinois, who is the fourth number 1 seed right now. But that's still like you're inching a little bit closer, but they've still got, like we said, it's going to take a lot, I think, to knock out those any of those Big Ten teams. Like I don't even know. Like, do we even think at this point that probably Michigan's a lock to get that third now number 1 seed? And I feel like it really it's just a matter of trying to knock out Illinois, and I think that's probably going to be hard to do. So,
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking to sort of sidestep your question for a bit, what I'm thinking I'm wanting if I'm the SEC is I'm wanting one Big Ten team like Michigan just to win out, right?
yeah,
And then I want Iowa, Illinois, Ohio State, and the rest of the league just to beat itself up. Like
yeah,
you want to see one of those teams get upset this weekend and maybe early in the conference tournament because there's going to be a Big Ten team or two on that 1 or 2 seed line. I mean, minimum, right?
yeah,
But what you want is you want an Alabama and an Arkansas to emerge as having a better case. And I think that's what you have to root for because they're not all going to beat each other, right? I
yeah.
don't think they are. I mean, you want one team, you want Michigan to win the tournament because Michigan's up there. And like you said, getting towards, I'm not going to say lock for one, but getting closer than the rest. I think you just want that to resolve and then say all those other teams that could sneak in as a 1 or maybe crowd out Arkansas for a 2 if the Razorbacks get hot in Nashville. I think that's your most realistic scenario.
And the problem that I think you run into is if you're Alabama and you're still trying to move into that number 1 seed, Illinois plays Ohio State this weekend. So that becomes an issue to where one of those teams is going to win that game. And, that's either going to, I think, solidify potentially Illinois' spot as a number 1. If they win that game, I think that probably does it. But no matter what happens, maybe in the Big Ten tournament, I think that probably solidifies it. If they're able to beat Ohio State, that moves them up. And then I think, likewise, like if Ohio State beats Illinois, then I think Ohio State probably would jump an Alabama. Again, if they're not already in some of these brackets, we're just using bracket matrix because obviously it's hard to choose between one or the other in terms of there's 80 million brackets out there. But it's just I think that's it. That's the problem is scheduling wise. It does Alabama no favors trying to move up to that 1 spot because Illinois and Ohio State are about to play each other in their regular season finale in the Big Ten. And then, someone's getting a significant win out of that, whereas Alabama plays Georgia, and it does absolutely nothing for you.
So I'm looking at the SEC schedule this weekend. If you're Greg Sankey sitting there and you're giving him truth serum, because obviously he's not going to say, well, we want this team to beat another. I think what you're wanting to happen, my biggest item on the list, oh goodness, probably LSU to beat Missouri because that's in Columbia. We both think Missouri is in probably regardless. LSU though teetering on that 9 seed line, though it's the first 9 seed in this, again referencing bracket matrix, which is not always going to be accurate. Some of these things update, some of these don't. Then you have some wild cards like the guy that I think that still got Kentucky in the field. But I think that that's your best case scenario because Missouri going to be in anyway, and I think if LSU goes on the road and wins that, you can punch their ticket.
Yeah, that's what we said. I think even in the scenario that LSU loses, as long as they avoid losing to a bottom tier team in the SEC tournament, which even then, I think they'd probably still be one of the last teams in potentially, or even safely in as a 10 or an 11. I think everyone's in at this point. And so I agree with you though. Like that would give LSU a bump in terms of the resume and maybe even potentially move them out of the 8-9 game, which you certainly want to avoid. I think if you're anyone, knowing the strength of the top 4 seeds. So I think that's probably it, is to kind of look at that and say, all right, we'd sure love to be able to, maybe get out of that if you're LSU. On the flip side, I mean, Missouri getting another win would certainly help them too, because as we said, based on the metrics and everything, and they still need good wins because kind of their seeding is interesting just based on what the numbers look like and then what their resume looks like. So that's going to be an interesting game. I think also I think it goes without saying that the two other results you probably don't want, if you're the SEC looking ahead to the NCAA tournament, is you don't want Alabama or Arkansas losing to Georgia or A&M. I think those would be significant enough to really, you don't want to give the committee any ideas in terms of dropping you down, a seed line or so. And I think that would do it if you're Alabama or Arkansas and you lose to one of those two teams. Because as we said, it's not just what you do; it's what everyone else around you does. And so when you're battling up there with Illinois, Ohio State, West Virginia, teams like that, and I don't know that Kansas did themselves any favors last night, even though they beat UTEP. That wasn't an overly impressive performance. But I think that's the thing, is you have to avoid bad losses this time of year, and that's what we said. The luxury for LSU, Missouri, Florida, Tennessee is that they get to avoid those bad losses in their final regular season game. Maybe not in the tournament, but we know they get to do it in the final regular season game. Whereas Alabama and Arkansas, those are two games that could significantly, give you a little bit of a knock, even as impressive as you are with 20 wins each. You don't want one of those two losses on your resume right now.
Yeah, you beat me to items 2 and 3 in no particular order. I don't think if you're the league, you want Alabama and A&M losing this weekend, because I think that would probably end Alabama's shot at a 1 and probably do the same thing for Arkansas as a 2. Those would be bad losses, or not terrible losses, but certainly, outside quad 1 losses, which that's not going to help. I think the next thing, gosh, you kind of want Florida to beat Tennessee, I think, because, again, I think both teams are in anyway, but Florida a little bit lower. Does that even matter? Is it so close?
I don't think it matters for Florida. I think Florida's in no matter what. And I just think it, like we said, I mean, we've talked about over the years the whole double bye in a conference tournament thing. Like, what's the committee's stance on that? I think at times people have kind of pointed out, there are some different methodologies and ideas on that. But I just can't look at this and say there can't be a huge significant difference. I think either way you slice it, probably with those two teams. So Tennessee still likely going to be seeded higher, probably. But Florida, I still think is going to be fine. That's what I said. I think the thing is, if you're Florida, LSU, Missouri, teams like that, you just don't want to do anything that's going to slide you into the 8-9 slot, which I don't think that Missouri's necessarily going to have to worry about that. I could be wrong. A win against LSU, and I think for sure, but that's the thing. It's like, that's what we're saying. And that's why we talked about the 1 seeds. It's like, these 1 seeds, we talk about 1 seeds being strong every year, but like, my goodness, this group of 1 seeds is as strong as we've seen, I want to say, in a little while, just because we know how strong Gonzaga is. We know what Baylor's capable of. Michigan, as we've seen, has just really jumped up to a level that I don't think a lot of people thought they would get to. And then take your pick from the other Big Ten teams. It's a strong 1 seed line. So that's I think what you're trying to avoid for the SEC. You'd love to be able to get everyone to a 7 seed or higher. I don't know that that's possible based on some of these teams having to play each other. But if you could, that would be the ultimate win, I think, for the league.
Okay, I want to look forward to the tournament a little bit, and again, trying to project where this is going to end up is next to impossible. But I'm looking at Arkansas sitting there, because are we accepting the premise that the results of the championship game probably aren't going to matter? What's your belief level in that?
I think probably unless you get a wild card in there, meaning unless you get a Missouri, an LSU, a team like maybe someone like their Florida or Tennessee, someone like that. I feel like that maybe if you're the committee, you can kind of say, okay, well, we've got this bracket in place. If one of these teams maybe ran the table, I think you obviously have to give them a little bit of a bump in that scenario. But otherwise, for Alabama and Arkansas, I don't know if you get that normal 1-2 matchup in the championship game. I don't know that it really affects all that much.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the way you do it is say it comes down to Arkansas and Ohio State for the last 2 seed.
Right.
You might just say, okay, one of these is going to be a 3 in this place and one's going to be 2 in this place, and it all depends on how this pans out. If Arkansas wins, Ohio State loses on Sunday or whatever, then that's where we're going to go. But I'm looking at the standings as of today, okay? And Arkansas is going to get the 10-7, which if that were to freeze right now, the 7 is Ole Miss and the 10 is Georgia. So if you're Arkansas, that Friday quarterfinal game does not move the needle for you if you win.
Yeah.
Then you look down and you've got either Florida or LSU. That's the 3. That's who you play. That team gets the winner of the 11-6. So I think if you're Arkansas, you're not wanting an upset there. You're not. I mean, unless Missouri stays as a 6, right? Again, we're looking at opportunities for quality wins. That's the problem if you're Arkansas.
Yeah.
You're probably, unless Missouri or say Tennessee falls to that 7 to where you get to pick up another skin, so to speak, by winning that Friday game. The danger for Arkansas is you might only have, even if you do everything right that you can control, you might only have one win of consequence that you pick up in Nashville. And I think in that scenario, it becomes hard maybe for you to get to the 2. Now, if everybody else face plants, and that's a different story, but I'm just thinking it might be an uphill battle looking on how the bracket could pan out, which is kind of stupid to say because if we know one thing about the league this year, it's like nailing Jello to a wall to try to predict what happens next. But having nothing else, I'm just going on what's in front of me. If the seeds played out like they are, that's one thing that I'm concerned about for Arkansas.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, kind of like we brought up, like those teams like West Virginia, Ohio State, Iowa, those teams that are kind of on that line with Alabama right now. And then if you're Arkansas, you're battling to jump ahead of teams like Kansas, which, as I said, I think that's certainly a possibility. Villanova, which, gosh, unfortunately, just lost Colin Gillespie for the season. I think it was a torn MCL. That significantly changes Villanova. So I wonder kind of what the committee does with them. And then Houston, who we talked about, I think, a couple of days earlier in the week on the podcast, kind of what their resume looked like. So it's not impossible to think that, teams like that, I think Florida State could be a challenge if Florida State wins the ACC championship. I have to believe that they're probably moving up pretty significantly in that scenario. So that, I think, is how you knock out those teams like Ohio State, West Virginia. I still think it's going to be a hard thing to do. If those teams avoid bad losses, like getting up there into that 2, I think is just going to be a really big challenge probably.
Are there any games that you're keeping an eye on this weekend outside of the league with bracket significance that might translate to what happens with the SEC? I mean, we've talked about the Big Ten. That's an obvious one, but I'm just wondering who you're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, like you said, I think that Illinois-Ohio State is really the one that probably jumps out to you. I do think Houston and Memphis is an interesting one because like we just talked about in terms of Houston, like they're a team that's kind of just hovered there. They just, they've lost a couple games that they probably shouldn't, certainly to Tulsa and East Carolina. They lost that game at Wichita State, and they've got Memphis, a Memphis team that's really playing very well right now. They've only lost one game since mid-January. So that's one I would keep an eye on just in terms of the teams near the top. Like we said, if you're Alabama or Arkansas and you're knowing that, a team like Houston is going to be there kind of battling with you in that same range. So I think that's definitely one that you certainly look at. And like I said, it's really just a matter of keeping an eye on some of those teams like West Virginia, who plays Oklahoma State this weekend. Just teams like that are in that range. Florida State plays at Notre Dame. I know Notre Dame is down a bit, but a loss there from Florida State probably wouldn't be ideal for their resume. So those are the things, is because really elsewhere, like we've said, for Tennessee, Missouri, Florida, LSU, I just don't, there's really not a whole lot to be watching, because you're trying to win your game against one of those teams this weekend, to help give your resume another quality win. Whereas if you're Alabama and Arkansas, you're starting to look ahead, like we've talked about, to the actual seeding process. And I think that's where, those are the teams where you have to look at it and say, okay, I probably need to root against that team if I want my team to keep moving up, as long as my team continues to take care of business, which we would assume that Alabama and Arkansas should both be able to do this weekend. Although, as we've seen, teams that have played at Georgia, if you're not named South Carolina, not always easy to win there. And then with A&M, you never know. So, So I think those are probably the games to keep an eye on. Be Illinois, Ohio State, Houston, Memphis, I think, are two that are particularly interesting.
Well, and one other thing, I think if you're the league, you want Ole Miss beating Vandy this weekend, because that helps you with, I think the Rebels would be a pretty solid NIT team at that point. And Mississippi State kind of in that same boat, with the chance to get there. For State especially, I think that could help. Ole Miss kind of a senior, more experienced team. State's got a lot of young players, and sometimes you see a team make a run in the NIT and springboard into a preseason top 25 next year, which I think, frankly, for State, if these guys come back, I would expect it'll be in that conversation.
Yeah.
So that's two things that are further down the ladder. Speaking of State, I think I finally figured out, because you and I probably have disagreed on them as much as any team. I look at some of their players. I like their backcourt. I like a couple guys they've got inside. And every time we have this conversation, you're kind of like, yeah, I don't know. And I think I figured it out. I'm looking at Ken Palm's strength of schedule in the league. State's played the worst schedule. So it is 8-9, but I think your point all along has been it's come against some of the weaker teams in the league. So I think that sort of accounts maybe for some of the difference in how you and I look at that team that I've just not been able to put my finger on.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we did bring up yesterday, they beat Florida and Missouri, but that was a while ago. And they beat Missouri the first week of January, so the third game of the SEC season. And so, I mean, that's valuable, but I just think when you look at where Missouri's been since then, it's different. And I think those are the kind of things that I probably look at with them. Because like you said, I mean, talent-wise, they got talent. And you just said it, I completely agree. If Mississippi State brings the majority of their guys back, they're going to be really good next season. They're going to be a probably top 5 team in the league, or at least should be. So that's my thing, is the more you look at who they've beaten, I think that's probably one of the things that stands out to me. And then it's just so hard to ignore some of those games that they've lost, like the 21-point loss at home to Vanderbilt, the 18-point loss at home to Ole Miss, where they only scored 46 in that one, scored 51 against Vanderbilt. Those are the kind of things I think I look at and think, those are not good losses. So maybe that's just part of it too. But I there are times where I probably should not be as low on them as I am. There are probably times where maybe it's a little warranted. But they're just, again, they are the product of the SEC this season in terms of one of those teams that's just really hard to figure out. And even if you dive deep into the numbers, it's not always going to tell you the full story.
Well, and even with the potential chance to make a little bit of noise in the Big 12 SEC Challenge, I mean, they draw Iowa State, which is probably the worst Power 5 team in the country this year. So
yeah.
Just kind of another little bullet point to that. But anything else on hoops before we move into a little baseball talk for the weekend?
No, I mean, like I said, some interesting games heading into the weekend. So yeah, we'll know exactly what the SEC tournament bracket looks like on Saturday night. So,
well, our buddy Barry Allen referred to the weekend's baseball slate as the equivalent of the pre-Thanksgiving SEC weekend, which I found pretty humorous. I think we got a chuckle out of that because I know what he's getting at. In looking at it a little bit more, and maybe this is just the case when you got 14 teams playing series, somebody's going to hit somewhere. I don't know that it's quite that bleak. You've got a couple series that interest me. One of them is Boston College and Auburn. BC has gotten into the rankings, and frankly, I'm not shocked because that team has got 3 or 4 really top-notch pro prospects. They've got an outfielder, Sal Frelick, who can really run, who's a potential first rounder. They've got, I want to say Boston College has got 2 or 3 guys that may go in the first 2 rounds of this draft. So they go to Auburn, which of course has hit the daylights out of the ball, although against, the equivalent of you and I throwing batting practice, I guess. So that's one that I'm watching. The other one is Georgia State and Tennessee. And we both saw Georgia State last weekend when it came to Nashville and really gave Vandy a run for its money. State won that Friday night game and then took Vandy to the brink on Saturday. Vanderbilt won that one 5-4. And then with the pitching kind of got upside down at that point. Vanderbilt didn't throw rocker and lighter until games 3 and 4. And I think by that time, as we said before, that's when you start kind of running out of arms, and they just kind of got swamped in those last 2 games. But Georgia State just thrashed Georgia Tech in the midweek. That's a really good team. Tennessee, I think this will be a great test for the Vols. I think those are the 2 biggest series I'm watching out for. I mean, the other one that I might throw in there is Dallas Baptist and Missouri. And I have not liked what Missouri has shown so far, but I think that's kind of Missouri's opportunity to maybe get right and surprise us a little bit. Because if you beat Dallas Baptist, that's usually a regional team, and that gives you a little something. So I guess to me, those are probably the 3 that I'm watching the most. Although Alabama going to College of Charleston on the road might be a little bit interesting too, just to see a team hit the road like that and see how it handles it. But I don't know. Other than that, not a whole lot to talk about this weekend.
No, and then Barry brought up some of those specifically in terms of on yesterday's. Like he was saying, really, we talked about Missouri. They lost that game last night to Dallas Baptist. It was 3-2. I mean, close game, but now they've got another game here on Friday. They play Oklahoma on Saturday, and they've got Arizona on Sunday. So that's a potential stretch there where if you're Missouri, you'd love to win a couple of those games, even though it's probably going to be easier said than done. And then you talked about Auburn. I think that's an interesting one too. Like we said, you look at just the runs and then how many they've put up, and if you just look at the SEC stats in terms of where teams stand right now, if you hadn't seen Auburn play this year and you just all of a sudden jumped in right now, you'd think, my goodness, this Auburn team is just unbelievable. Which again, I don't care who you play, like you're putting up as many runs as they have. It's impressive to a certain extent. But yeah, I think you learn more against a team like Boston College that's ranked 23 now, I think. So that's a good game for sure here on Friday. And then Tennessee, we talked about it with Barry. He kind of pointed out, that's one of those teams that's still hard to figure out. But now that you start to get some of these common opponents, where you saw what Vanderbilt could do against a team like Georgia State, how does a team like Tennessee compare, and what are the things that maybe they're able to do with the pitching and take advantage of some of those things like we talked about that Vanderbilt did, Georgia State's pitching staff and all that. So yeah, not the most intriguing weekend, I guess, from top to bottom. I know that there's a lot of baseball out there, though. There's going to be a lot of games being played, like you said, with everyone in action. So should be some interesting ones. But I think Missouri's and that game with Auburn and Boston College probably the ones that stand out the most.
Okay, I'm going to retract my comment on Alabama Charleston being interesting. I looked at who Charleston's beaten and not beaten, and that should not be interesting. If it is, Alabama's got an issue. A couple more. I mean, Oral Roberts has been a really good mid-major program for a long time. I don't know the state of that team this year, but they go to LSU. Illinois Chicago comes to Vandy. That's a veteran team. As Barry noted, they play every year. UIC will come up to Nashville and take one out of a series every couple of years. Mercer in South Carolina may be one. Mercer has been a really good team in its league for a couple of years and has produced some pro prospects, Kyle Lewis for the Mariners being one of those. So I don't know, maybe if you dig a little deeper and squint a little bit, some of those get a little more interesting. But really, I think we're all just waiting for 2 weeks from now till conference play starts, right?
Listen, our man Barry's gonna have it all covered. It doesn't like he's gonna watch all this. He's gonna have a chance to just check all this out because that is what this man does. He's fantastic, and I just want to point that out. Like I know we don't have him on the podcast today, but like Barry's just his insight is incredible, and I know our friend Hunter Johnson who gave us the nice Twitter bump. I appreciate it, Hunter. On Thursday nights, he talked about Barry's just listening to Barry talk about baseball. It's just it's on another level, man. It's so exciting, and like you said, I mean, if you want to get excited about SEC baseball season, and you want to just say, all right, what do I need to do to get excited? Just turn on the podcast, listen to Barry, and you're going to be into it because, man, it's so fun to hear him talk about SEC baseball.
Well, and this is self-serving, I'm sure, because he's part of our show. I literally think Barry knows more SEC baseball than anybody alive. I mean, he was the media relations guy at Alabama for a quarter century. He's got this running tally of teams he's seen. I think he's seen close to 200 Division I teams play, different programs. I mean, you add in NAI and JUCO, and I think it's over 300. But the guy's like a baseball savant.
Yeah, no, he's one of a kind, and that's why you've said before, and I'm with you. Like we are lucky to have him because I think it's going to make SEC baseball season so much more exciting just for us to be able to, for us, not only just for me and you to be able to watch these games and to cover it, but like just to listen to his insight. Like I feel like I gained so much just from listening to him. So it's it's something that I think is again just going to make this season really a lot of fun.
All right, Blake, we are in the middle of getting a March Madness content plan together. I think we're going to have a pretty exciting announcement coming soon that entails a little bit of listener involvement. I'll just leave it at that. But tell folks where to find us on Twitter, where to find our website, what you've got cooking for this weekend. Of course, Barry will have his wrap-up of baseball stuff. I'm probably going to start writing some baseball stuff a little before too long. My hesitation, as I've said, is just want to see these teams play a little bit more before I make conclusions, and that's been difficult, especially with basketball going. But I'll give you the floor to tease some stuff, to tell people where to follow us as we end today's show.
14 Southeastern on Twitter. Like I said, we're really starting to kind of grow things over there, and as you mentioned, that's the place to follow. If you're on Twitter, follow us at 14 Southeastern because we do have some exciting listener involvement type stuff on the way here as we get ready to head into tournament play, SEC baseball, conference play in a couple weeks. We've got some pretty exciting things that we're working on. And then over at the website, southeastern14.com, you can check out, we've got our SEC baseball recaps, Barry stuff, your stuff. I'll have my SEC basketball picks for Saturday, our notebook coming up after that. After the action, we'll probably go ahead and look ahead to the bracket once we know exactly what the seeding looks like. And then I'm sure next week we'll have a full sort of bracket predictions. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to do when we have our podcast. We'll probably go through an entire one, maybe picking all the games. So much exciting stuff here at this time of year. And just lots to talk about. So
I can't wait for it. Again, this is my favorite month of the year, and all the good stuff's right in front of us. So anyway, thank you for listening to us here at the 14. Remember to rate, review, subscribe. Tell some friends as we grow our audience here. But anyway, for Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee, host of the 14. We appreciate you listening. We'll be back at you Monday as we go throughout our rotation, which is we do a podcast every day, Monday through Friday. So we'll catch you again Monday. Hope you all have a very safe and happy weekend.